Well, hey everybody, I'm John Ritlin with a retro review of WCW Halloween Havoc 1994. Now, this one was not as good as 1989, as 1989 is actually one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time. I would put that up with a lot of pay-per-views, just my personal opinion, at least in WCW. Now, the 94 edition actually had some pretty good matches. The problem is the main event of the 89 pay-per-view, while messy, Sting, Flair versus Muta and Funk, it was messy and silly because of the Thunderdome stipulation, they made it work, and they made it feel personal. You go to 1994 and it's Flair Hogan in a career-ending match that's so goddamn overbooked. Good God, it's just so goddamn bad. Don't worry, I'm going to get into that, and I'm going to have a Halloween Havoc 1999 retro review up sometime a day or two after this, so please look out for that. And thank you guys for the support for the channel. I really do appreciate it. And we get to Tony Schiavone, Bobby Heenan, and Mean Gene Okerlund kicking us off, and Bobby Heenan going nuts about the career-ending stipulation, how he wants Flair to win, all this stuff. Bobby Heenan was absolutely on fire the whole damn night. Where they cut to the announcers, or whether he was calling the matches, Bobby Heenan is one of the best color commentators of all time. If he's not one of the best, wrestling commentators, period, of all time, I would sure love to see that list, because Bobby Heenan always made things work. While getting the matches over and getting people over, he could just be absolutely great with his one-liners. Even as his health did start to, unfortunately, take a bit of a dip, he was still goddamn great. It's just such a shame. It's just such a shame what happened to Bobby Heenan, but I've talked about that in other videos. With this, he was absolutely at his peak. He really was. This was close to Royal Rumble 92 levels. Close to. Not quite, because nothing's ever going to top that from Heenan. So, how do you make the pay-per-view paying customers happy that they bought this pay-per-view? Well, you start off with the Honky Tonk Man opening the show. This fucking goddamn moron that never deserved to be in the wrestling business, never deserved to be on WWE TV, was a goddamn joke, the worst Intercontinental Champion of all time, especially of any lengthy reign, face off against Johnny B. Bad for the WCW TV Championship. I have never liked Honky Tonk Man at all. He was a goddamn joke to me. I know there are people watching that like Honky Tonk Man. That's cool. You guys can like him. I do not care, because guess what? It doesn't mean that I'm devaluing your opinion. That's not it at all. I just never liked the guy. The guy was a goddamn joke. He was a goddamn egotistical jackass, and he was never that good of a worker. He really wasn't. Like, what could he do? Wow, he could do the Elvis shit and everything, so he could rip off a guy that, that was way more famous and way more talented, even at his worst, than Honky Tonk Man could have ever been at his best. But he faced off against Johnny B. Bad, TV title match, and boy, I felt bad for Johnny B. Bad. Now, granted, Mark Merrow was a good worker. He had to usually have somebody, better than him, with more experience to get the best possible match. But he could work a pretty good match. But when you have somebody as lazy and as incoherent and as stupid and as useless as a Honky Tonk Man, you're going to get not a very good match. And it goes to a time limit draw, and I felt bad for Johnny B. Bad, who did the best he could. But when you're working with a goddamn slug and one of the worst ever, you're going to get that. So it was a time limit draw. It was shit. It was not a good way to open the pay-per-view, because Honky Tonk Man couldn't fucking work at this point. Hogan getting his friends jobs since who God knows when, or God knows when. So we get recaps of Hogan and Flair, Clash of Champions. We get teases of the Masked Man appearing throughout the night, but the Masked Man appeared here. Who is the Masked Man? There were two of them. So who are they? We find out a little bit later. And then the announcers kill time for a good while. And then we get the tag team championship match. Pretty wonderful. Paul Roma and Paul Orndorff. I almost said Paul Ellering. That would have been interesting. But yeah, the team pretty wonderful. Pretty underappreciated tag team. Versus Stars and Stripes, which was Marcus Bagwell and the Patriot. It was alright. It wasn't bad. Pretty wonderful. Beat up Bagwell quite a bit. There was a lot of confusion where nobody really made a tag and the Patriot was just hitting Roma with a bunch of stuff. The referee finally got the Patriot out of the ring. Bagwell had hit a fisherman suplex, a variation of the Perfect Plex, though it was good. It just wasn't like Mr. Perfect's Perfect Plex, because Mr. Perfect is a whole lot better, even at his worst, than Bagwell could have ever been at his best. And yeah, I'm reusing that line because Bagwell was only good in tag teams. He was not really all that good as a single star. And Roma hits a huge elbow behind the referee's back, just off the ropes. Really, really huge elbow. And Orndorff covers Bagwell, and Pretty Wonderful wins the tag team championships again. They don't hold him for very long, but they do win him again. Yeah, that happened. We then get Flair and Sherry. We get a Flair and Sherry interview with Mean Gene Okerlund. It was what it was. Sherry fired up, Flair fired up. Good stuff. Good stuff between these two. And then we get Kevin Sullivan versus Dave Sullivan. Fucking hell. Who thought this was a good idea? Kevin Sullivan, who never really could wrestle. Dave Sullivan, Dave Sullivan might be a nice guy. I don't fucking know. But this was atrocious. It was Dave Sullivan wanting to be Hulk Hogan's #1 fan, and even had like a song that was sung by children, like I Want to Be a Hulkamaniac, and it's one of the cheesiest things. And look, I get it. WCW is still trying to get its stuff, its feet under it, the feet under the company. They were still basically trying to just fucking crawl because they had a whole lot of issues, even with an uptick in support. They had really been struggling for a long time to draw some big crowds. And they brought along Hogan, and then they decided to just have everybody love Hogan, except Kevin Sullivan, and it was shit. It was goddamn rotten. It was fucking terrible. It one of the worst matches of '94 easily, because Kevin Sullivan couldn't work, neither could Dave Sullivan. But Dave Sullivan somehow wins by countout. Yay! Now we get to Arn Anderson with Colonel Rob Parker and Ming. Ming is in the arena. We must run. We must all run. I don't care if this was 25 years ago. We must all run. Because even if Ming can't really run right now, or Ming, Haku, when he catches you, oh fuck, it's on. So he took on Dustin Rhodes. Arn Anderson and Dustin Rhodes had a feud building since Bash at the Beach '94. Pretty good build here, and it felt very personal. There were some good strikes, some good action and everything. And Dustin was able to get the win after Arn Anderson had tried to use the ropes. That didn't work. Dustin Rhodes got reverse sunset flip, 1, 2, 3. And then got beat down afterwards, but he won the match. So, okay, I mean, that was cool. That was what it was. I mean, Dustin getting the victory was nice, even though I think this feud continued for a little bit after that. I'd have to watch the November Clash to remember. But this was pretty good. And then we get Hogan, Jimmy Hart, and Bruce Beefcake, or Brother Brudai, in an interview, and I never really care for Bruce Beefcake. I just never have. And don't worry, I'm going to get into a little bit of shit a little bit later. But typical Hogan promo, hyping up the main event. Recaps of Austin being beaten by Duggan for the U.S. title at Fall Brawl. And then we get this rematch. Stunning Steve Austin versus Jim Duggan for the U.S. Championship. Jim Duggan was a U.S. champion shortly after coming into the company. I don't have anything against Jim Duggan as a person. His work was fine. His Mid-South work was better. If you do get a chance to watch his Mid-South work, he actually was a pretty good brawler and pretty goddamn over. His stuff in early WWE wasn't that bad, and then he just got to where he wasn't going to do as much because of the tough road schedule. But, yeah, he was a U.S. champion. He was never a champion in WWE, but he became a U.S. champion. Now, he wasn't as bad as Mongo, let's say that much, because at least Duggan could actually kind of wrestle and brawl and actually make his shit look convincing, and Mongo couldn't if his life depended on it. So, anyway, Austin attacks early, working on the knee. Match was what it was. There's still that stupid DQ for throwing somebody over the top rope rule. I hated that rule. That's the one thing I hate about old school wrestling. I just never really liked it. I never liked it when I was a kid when WCW did it. And I know other companies did it for years and years before, and that's the way they would do it to build to like a rematch for like a championship or a way to get out where the babyface would look like they're about to win, but they dumped the heel over the top rope accidentally. Or anything like that, or vice versa. It just was a stupid rule, in my personal opinion. I know some people disagree. But then, so Austin loses by DQ, and then Duggan swings his wood at Austin, his 2x4. I mean, not his actual wood. That would be disturbing. Moving on. We then get a Mean Gene interview with Sting. Sting looks like he's going to be part of the Secret Service. He is not on the card. I think he was injured. So he wasn't medically cleared, so they didn't have him on the card. Or they didn't have a place for him. It was one of the two. But Sting was like, I'm gonna be at ringside in the crowd in front row, and I'm gonna observe this main event match, and I'm gonna make sure nothing bad happens. Well, Sting, he didn't do a very good job of that. So we then get recaps of the Vader and Guardian Angel feud. Guardian Angel, of course, the big boss man, who was known as the boss, and then wait, you're the boss, man. Maybe we should be careful with, and then WCW had to change the whole thing because, oh yeah, it's pretty much gimmick infringement. But Vader versus Guardian Angel, good stuff. Harley Race took more bumps than Vader and Guardian Angel, for God's sakes. Harley Race, who had been retired since about late 90, early 91, it was bad. It was bad to see Harley Race taking those kind of bumps. The match was good. These two always have physical matches. This is kind of the blow-off. As Guardian Angel, really was just beating up Vader. There was a cool Vader bomb spot for 2. Vader did get slammed on Harley at one point. That looked like it really hurt. I mean, and don't get me wrong. Guardian, Boss was safe. I'm just going to say Ray Trailer. He was safe, but still, it looked like it hurt. Because it's a 450-pound guy landing on a retired wrestler. And then, Guardian Angel does a suplex to Race. He keeps beating him up. And then Vader hits a sudden splash. 1, 2, 3. And that's a nice way to build the feud. And then Vader would beat Jim Duggan for the U.S. title a little bit later at Starrcade 94. Hooray, the U.S. title's on somebody credible. That just sounds like I'm needlessly burying Jim Duggan. I actually have nothing against him. I just didn't like him as champion. Then we get the Nasty Boys versus Terry Funk and Bunkhouse Buck with Ming and Rob Parker. And look, this is just a brawl. It was just a brawl. That's all it was. It was a brawl within the confines of a tag match. The Nasty Boys... The Nasty Boys brought a pumpkin to the ring, which would factor in a little bit later. Terry Funk hit himself in the head a few times with a chair because he's Terry Funk. And then at one point, the pumpkin gets brought in. Pumpkin pile driver, and then 1, 2, 3. It was all right. And then we get a cool piece where Muhammad Ali is being presented with a portion of the proceeds from the show. All about helping his foundation for troubled youths. Good stuff. Really sad to see Muhammad Ali at this point. Illnesses, conditions had taken a hold of him. And he had the shakes, unfortunately, because of his illnesses. It's just a shame. It just really, really is a shame. And just one of the best talkers. As controversial as he was, there's no doubt about that. It's just a shame to see one of the greatest boxers of all time in that condition. And he lived for a number of years after that, but it's such a shame. But then we get Heenan being fired up about the main event and everything, and all this stuff and everything. And then we get to Hogan versus Flair. And this is how it was actually listed. Steel cage career-ending match for the WCW title. Mr. T is a special guest referee. Jimmy Hart in Hogan's corner. Outside the ring. Sherry in Flair's corner. And Sting there at ringside. And of course the Masked Man would make his presence known at one point. The cage came down crooked, which was kind of hilarious. The cage nearly got taken out on the ring post. And the cage was also only about 8 feet high. Now, Flair's like, what, 6'2"? Something like that. Hogan's 6'6"? 6'6", 6'7", I think about 6'6". He was listed 6'8", 6'9", but more like 6'8". But anyway, or maybe 6'4". The whole point is these guys were above 6 feet tall. And the cage barely was above their heads. Now, I get it. You go with budgetary constraints and all that, but good God, that just, it looked like, okay, you couldn't crawl out of the cage, or you couldn't climb out of the cage, because even if you did that, you'd have to win in the ring. But anything goes in this match. And boy, we get to find out. This match was overbooked as fuck. Now, the match itself for a bit was typical Flair Hogan. It was fine. Then we get a ref bump. Okay, Mr. T's down. Sherry tries to get in the cage. Jimmy Hart pulls down her skirt. And she's just wearing some kind of lingerie underneath. Whatever. Sherry was a talented, and beautiful woman and everything. And I'm not complaining from a perspective like that. But Sherry in WCW always seemed like she could have been more. I always thought she was great as Harlem Heat's manager. I always thought she was great as that. But then we get, so Jimmy Hart pants her. Then Sherry's still trying to get in the ring. Sting gets her. But then the Masked Man comes from under the ring and hits Sting, and then hits Jimmy Hart, and it's like a whole big fucking mess and schmoz and stuff like that. Mr. T gets handcuffed to the ropes by Sherry. There's, the Masked Man gets the pipe, dangles his lengthy pipe in front of Hogan, and he gets run into it. Picture that how you want. And then eventually Hogan just beats up Sherry. Now safely. He actually was pretty careful with Sherry. And beat up Flair. And then eventually hit the leg drop and waken Mr. T 1, 2, 3. And so, okay, Hogan wins. Because all that happened and everything. And by the way, all this time, Sting and Jimmy Hart were taken to the back. So then, oh boy, you have Hogan celebrating everything. Okay, he celebrates Mr. T. Mr. T presents a world title to him. That's cool. Or, he hands the world title to Muhammad Ali. He hands it back to him. That's cool. Good moment. Certainly not going to complain about that. But then, for fuck's sake, the Masked Man tries to attack Hogan. And Hogan eventually catches him, beats him down and everything, and then unmasks him. And it's Brutus Beefcake. It's Brother Bruti. They are making Brutus Beefcake one of, honestly, the biggest joke wrestlers, like, really, of I would say the 80s and 90s. And look, I want to clarify again with the man himself. I'm glad he survived that parasailing accident, as horrible as that was. That was truly horrible. He could have died. He didn't. He recovered, and he got back, and he got to have a career. I just never cared for the guy. He was fine in the Dream Team with Greg Valentine, but once he became the cutting and strutting guy, sure, he was over with kids, but, a lot of things were over with me as a kid. I just never cared for Brutus Beefcake, and then so he's a mess. So they're making him this top heel, and Bobby Heenan says he has butchered the friendship. And then, hence the Butcher name that comes up. Don't worry, I'm going to review Starrcade 94, by the way. That's a retro review I'll be doing. Might just actually record those in November if I have time. And just upload them periodically. So the whole point of this is, oh boy, this was really, really bad. Then we have Kevin Sullivan come down. They beat down him. And also, who comes up? John Tenta, who was Earthquake, who had left WWE sometime before. They would then call him the Shark. Well, they would call him Avalanche. But then that was too close, and then they call him the Shark. And then he beat John Tenta before he left the company and then lost some weight and then came back as Golga in the Oddities. He had a weird career after 94. So anyway, yes, we're getting Brutus Beefcake in the main event of Starrcade against Hulk Hogan. That is one of the biggest goddamn slaps in the face to anybody. And again, Brutus could be a nice guy. It's just he's in the main event of Starrcade. A show that was headlined by Vader and, Flair the year before. Flair had main evented multiple times. Fuck, Lex Luger main event. Lex Luger deserved to main event Starrcade more than Brutus Beefcake did. It was just a goddamn joke. It was a goddamn atrocity. This event kind of just spiraled out of control. Now, was it as bad as 99? Oh, don't worry. That's the first WCW pay-per-view of the Vince Russo era. Don't worry. I'm going to shred that motherfucker, properly. Because that pay-per-view was ass. But this one ended terribly. It was just an overbooked mess. It was absolute shit. So anyway, I'm going to end that. So agree, disagree with what I said. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.